I started hearing the noise 2 weeks ago. It was faint at first, just a soft, rhythmic tapping under the floorboards in the dead of night. I live alone in a small, century-old farmhouse on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown fields and one long, unpaved driveway that no one uses but me. At first, I thought it was animals. Maybe raccoons or foxes nesting in the crawlspace. But the tapping never stopped. It would come every night, exactly at 2:12 a.m. Not 2:10, not 2:15. Always 2:12. I tried to ignore it. I'd put on headphones, play white noise. I even started taking sleeping pills, hoping it would drown out the noise or at least dull my anxiety. But the tapping only grew louder. It turned into scratching, then scraping, like claws against wood. Something persistent and methodical, like whatever was underneath my house had a plan. Last Thursday, I cracked. I crawled under the house with a flashlight and a broom in hand, ready to chase off whatever vermin had decided to claim the place as their own. But there were no animals. Instead, I found a hole. It was perfectly round, about the size of a manhole, and it hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. I've been under this house plenty of times to fix plumbing or chase out mice. But this was different. The edges were smooth, like something had bored through the earth deliberately, not randomly. No loose dirt. No claw marks. Just a tunnel that disappeared into darkness, sloping downwards and veering slightly to the left. I stood there in silence, feeling the damp air rising from below. It smelled like whetstone and copper. My flashlight barely penetrated the blackness beyond the first few feet. That night, the sound didn't come from beneath my house. It came from my bedroom wall. Something had moved. The next day, I called a local contractor. Told him I thought there might be structural issues under the foundation, maybe erosion, maybe sinkholes. I didn't want to mention the tunnel. Not yet. The guy came out the following morning, took a look underneath, and emerged within minutes. He looked pale. "You didn't dig that?" he asked. "No," I said. He paused for a long time. "That tunnel's deep. Too deep for a critter. It's like someone's trying to reach something. Or avoid something. Can you seal it?" "I could try. But you might want to call someone else first." "Who?" He handed me a card. Boone Geological Survey, it said. Not a company I'd heard of before. "I've only had to call them once," he added. "And I hope I never have to again." That evening, I stood in the hallway and listened. Nothing. I moved from room to room. Silence. Until I reached the basement door. It was open. I never leave the basement open. I live alone. I have routines. I always close the basement door after doing laundry. And I hadn't been down there in days. I grabbed a hammer and slowly crept down the steps, my flashlight flickering as if the battery was already dying. The bulb caught shaped shelves, boxes, a rusted sink in the corner, but nothing unusual. Until I saw it. Another hole. This one was smaller, like a drain, but again, perfectly round. And surrounding it was a ring of disturbed concrete, as if the floor had been peeled back like the lid of a can. There were scratches around the edges. Long, deep ones. And something oily smeared in streaks along the concrete. I reached out and touched the edge. It was warm. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the sound, but because of the silence. It was wrong. I kept imagining movement under the bed, behind the walls, under the floor. I turned on all the lights. Poured salt along the basement steps. I don't know why. It just felt right. Like something old and irrational in me knew that whatever was coming didn't like salt. At 2:12 a.m., the power went out. Everything shut off. Lights, fridge, even my phone died in my hand as I held it under the blanket, hoping it was all just my imagination. Then the tapping came back. Not from the floor. From inside the bedroom closet. The tapping from the closet wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was patient. Like a finger gently knocking on wood. I stared at the closet door, paralyzed. The room was lit only by a faint blue hue from the moon outside. No electricity. No sound from the rest of the house. Just that steady tap, tap, tap. I stood and took one step forward. The tapping stopped. I waited. Nothing. And then, knock, knock, knock. Fast, deliberate. Right against the inside of the door, like someone waiting for me to open it. I didn't. Instead, I backed out of the room and slammed the door shut behind me. I wedged a chair under the handle and ran downstairs. The salt line on the basement steps was broken. Not scattered, disturbed. Like something had stepped over it. I spent the night in my truck, parked at the far end of the gravel drive. I didn't sleep. When the sun came up, I called Boone Geological Survey. A man answered on the first ring. "This is Dr. Sam Boone," he said in a gravelly voice. Who referred you? I gave him the contractor's name. He went silent for several seconds, then asked for my address. He arrived 4 hours later in a battered black SUV. He was tall, in his 60s, with leathery skin and a sharp nose that made him look like some old hawk in a wool coat. He had no assistants, just a single, worn briefcase. I'd like to see the tunnel, he said without introduction. I led him under the house. He took one look at the original hole and let out a low whistle. Thought these were all collapsed, he muttered. What do you mean? But he didn't answer. He reached into his case and pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a compass and a Geiger counter. He held it to the hole. It clicked. Softly at first, then faster. He looked up at me. Has anything come out yet? What kind of question is that? Exactly the kind I need to ask. We moved to the basement. When he saw the second hole smaller, but clearly connected, his expression turned grim. He took photos, readings, notes. Finally, he stood and said, "You're not dealing with animals. You're not even dealing with man-made activity. This is old, deep, subterranean." Subterranean what? There are things older than soil, older than language. Sometimes tunnels like these lead to places that should have stayed buried. I blinked at him. Are you saying something, is digging toward me? Boone nodded. Or around you. Or under others. These networks span for miles. They're not supposed to be active anymore. What are they? But he didn't respond. Just packed his tools, stood slowly, and said, I'll send you a report. But you need to leave. Tonight. I live here. Not anymore. And then he walked out. That night, I stayed up again, all the lights blazing. At 2:12 a.m., the lights flickered. Then a humming sound began. Not mechanical. More like a droning chant heard through 6 feet of earth. It vibrated up through the floor, into the walls, into my bones. I pressed my hands against the living room floorboards. It was vibrating rhythmic, like pulsing breath. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack from upstairs. I ran to the hall. My bedroom door was wide open. The chair I'd wedged under the knob was now splintered and tossed aside. I stepped inside. The closet door was open. The salt I had poured along the baseboards was gone. Not pushed aside. Gone. Like it had been scooped away. On the floor was something new. A trail of dirt, fresh, dark, moist, leading out of the closet and across the carpet to my bed. It stopped just short of the footboard. That's when I noticed the impression. Not a footprint. A handprint. Large. For long fingers. No thumb. Each groove dug deep into the floor like someone or something had paused there, watching me sleep. I called Boone the next morning. He didn't answer. I tried the contractor. His number was disconnected. I even called the sheriff. Told him I had a trespasser, maybe even a stalker. When he arrived and I showed him the tunnel, he just stared and said, "Is this a prank?" I insisted it wasn't. He promised to file a report and send someone from animal control. No one came. That night, I left the lights off. Sat in silence with my phone camera aimed at the closet. Recording. At 2:12 a.m., the closet door slowly creaked open. But nothing emerged. Instead, something slid across the carpet. Just out of frame. Then, from the hallway, a whisper. We're almost through. I replayed the video a dozen times. There was no visual, just the creak of the closet door and the faint drag across the floor. But the audio, the voice whispering, "We're almost through," chilled me deeper than any image could have. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound not human either. It was close, like someone imitating a voice they'd only ever heard once. Something just a few degrees off from normal. Like an echo from the wrong side of a mirror. The next morning, I drove to the county office to get the house's original blueprints. The clerk gave me a skeptical look but handed over a dusty file folder after a few minutes of digging. There were no mentions of tunnels. But something stood out. An annotation near the southeast corner of the house. A hand-drawn circle. No label. Just a faint pencil mark with the letters, DW 13. When I asked what it meant, the clerk just shrugged. Never seen that code. You sure that's ours? I stopped by the town library next. Old archives, property records. I needed answers, anything about this land, the house, the previous owners. That's where I found it. A newspaper clipping from 1979. Yellowed, brittle. 3 missing after farm collapse. A family of 3 vanished from their home just outside town after part of the land beneath their farmhouse caved in. Authorities found a series of deep, narrow tunnels beneath the property. No bodies were ever recovered. The address matched mine. Same house. Same spot. The article ended with a quote from the local sheriff at the time. If I believed in hell, I'd say it opened under that place. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I spread a circle of salt around my bed, pushed furniture against all doors and windows, kept my phone camera recording. At 2:12 a.m., it began again. This time, louder. The floor groaned. The wall shook. I could feel the digging now, directly under my feet, like claws churning through soil. And then boom, a sharp thud from the basement, followed by silence. I crept down the stairs, holding my breath. The salt line on the steps was gone. Again, I flipped on the basement light. There was a new tunnel, wider, taller. It had breached the far wall and opened like a maw, a gaping black throat ringed with wet roots and stone. I took one step closer. There were handprints along the walls, dozens of them, pressed into the dirt like something had been crawling up, bracing itself as it emerged. The tunnel reeked of iron and something sweet and rotting, like fruit left in a closed car for a month. And then I saw it. A tooth. Small. Sharp. Not human. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was still warm. I tried calling Dr. Boone again. No answer. I drove to the return address listed on his business card. The office was abandoned. Not recently. For years. Windows boarded. Paint flaking. Dust caked thick on every surface inside. It was like no one had worked there since the 1980s. But on the floor, half buried under a broken filing cabinet, I found a notebook. Boone's handwriting. Pages filled with diagrams of tunnel systems. Notes on subterranean migration patterns. The last few entries were different. Paranoid. Urgent. Entry 1. If the tunnels reactivate, stay above ground. Salt is temporary. They adapt. Entry 2. Some houses act as beacons. Mine was. I left too late. Entry 3. They use memory. They learn from us. They pretend to be what we've lost. The final entry was a scrawl across the entire page. Do not let them finish. I came home just before dark. Every light in the house was on, but I hadn't left them that way. I stepped inside slowly. The smell hit me instantly, earth, copper, and something feral. It wasn't just in the basement anymore. It was everywhere. In the kitchen, I found mud-caked footprints across the floor. Thin, elongated prints that trailed toward the living room and stopped just before the old family photo I kept on the shelf. The glass was cracked. My parents' faces had been scratched out. Only mine remained. And written in tiny, shaking script along the photo's edge was one word. Mine. I don't know what they are. I don't know why they chose this house. But I know one thing. They're almost through. And I think they've started to come out during the day. Because as I write this, I hear footsteps in the kitchen. I live alone. I didn't turn around. I stood frozen in my hallway, the sound of those steps lingering behind me like a breath on my neck. 1, 2, pause. Whoever, or whatever, it was had stopped moving. I braced myself, spun around, and swung the flashlight like a weapon. The hallway was empty. No figure. No intruder. But the kitchen light flickered, and the refrigerator door stood open. And on the floor were muddy footprints. They led out the back door. Except the back door was still locked. Deadbolt engaged. Chain latch in place. Whatever had walked through my house hadn't come in through the door. It had come up through the floor. I spent the rest of the night with every light on and my back to the wall, staring at every shadow as though it might twitch or breathe. I stopped sleeping entirely. Food didn't matter anymore. I couldn't keep anything down. My eyes burned from lack of rest, and my thoughts started looping. Do not let them finish. Mine. They pretend to be what we've lost. I didn't know what was worse, the idea that something inhuman was crawling toward me, or that it wanted me to recognize it. 3 days ago, I woke up on the living room couch. I didn't remember falling asleep. The TV was on. Just static. I hadn't turned it on. There was a wet trail leading from the hallway to the couch. Something had slithered through the house while I was out cold. I checked my phone. There was a video in my gallery. I don't remember recording it. It showed me, asleep on the couch. The camera slowly moved toward me, handheld, as if someone was filming over my shoulder. At the 14-second mark, I saw it. Just behind the couch, in the hallway, something moved. Its shape was vague and wrong, but the head was unmistakable. Tall. Elongated. Tilted slightly like a curious child. I paused the video. Its eyes were glowing. I packed a bag and got in my truck. I didn't know where to go, but I needed to go. Anywhere. As I turned onto the main road, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. I pressed play. The voice was my mother's. She died 4 years ago. Honey, are you still in the house? I'm here, sweetie. I came back. Come downstairs. I made your favorite. Her voice was perfect. The inflection, the warmth. But the final word, favorite, was stretched, as if her mouth didn't know how to form it. Like she was practicing how to be her. I threw the phone out the window and kept driving. I spent the night at a roadside motel 40 miles away. No digging. No tapping. No static. Just quiet. I thought I was safe. But at 2:12 a.m., I woke up gasping. My bed was shaking. Just a little. Like a tremor. And then I heard it. Tap. 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 From inside the bathroom wall. I flung the door open. Nothing. But the vent in the ceiling was loose. I stood there staring, heart pounding, until I realized. There's nowhere they can't reach. I drove back to the house the next morning. I should have burned it down. But I needed to know. I needed to see how far it had gone. When I opened the front door, the smell was unbearable. Like soil, rot, and old breath. My floorboards had cracked open. Parts of the living room had caved in. Beneath the collapse was a massive tunnel, perfectly smooth, curving into the dark like a throat waiting to swallow. The entire house was being hollowed out from beneath. I looked up and nearly screamed. On the ceiling were dozens of handprints, pressed from below the wood, as if dozens of arms had been reaching up, toward me, toward the light. The boards bulged and splintered around them like the house itself was straining to hold back what was under it. I ran, but I didn't go far, because something inside me whispered, finish it. That night, I went down into the basement for the last time. Armed with a lantern, a crowbar, and a jar of salt, I stepped into the largest tunnel. It was almost tall enough for me to walk upright. The air inside was humid and thick, like being inside a throat. Roots dangled from the ceiling. The walls pulsed faintly. I walked for minutes, then longer, and finally the tunnel opened into a chamber. Huge, cathedral-like. The walls were covered in scratch marks and symbols. Bones lay in piles, deer, raccoons, human, and at the center was a well. Round, silent, breathing. I stepped closer. From inside, a voice called up. You should have stayed asleep. The voice rose out of the well like steam, slow, curling, impossible to hold in your mind for long without feeling it scrape across your nerves. You should have stayed asleep, it said again. This time, it sounded like me. Same cadence. Same rasp in the throat. Same voice I used to leave voicemails. I took a step back. The well shifted. No, something inside it did. A shape. Bulky. Writhing just beneath the surface of shadow. Not water. Not stone. It moved like muscle. I threw the salt at it. Instantly, the chamber shrieked. Every tunnel in the network echoed with the sound. The walls vibrated so violently that chunks of dirt rained from the ceiling and bones skittered across the floor like dice. I turned and ran. But behind me, something climbed out of the well. Its fingers scraped the edge of the stone, and I heard my own voice whispering behind me. Come back. We're still waiting. We're almost you. I barely made it out of the tunnel before the entrance collapsed behind me. The entire house groaned above, like it had exhaled for the first time in years. Cracks spiderwebbed across the foundation. One of the basement walls gave way completely and vomited up soil, rock, and a single, shriveled foot, four-toed, blackened, with a small silver ring around the ankle. Not mine, but human. I didn't wait to see what else would come. I left that night with only the clothes on my back. I spent the next few weeks in a cheap rental on the other side of the county. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I didn't check the news. I just sat there, staring at blank walls, trying to make sense of what happened. And for a while, it worked. The nightmares stopped. No more tapping. No more 2:12 a.m. Until yesterday. I came home from the store, set my keys down, turned on the kitchen light, and saw them. Footprints. Thin. Muddy. Leading from the pantry to the hallway. But worse, they weren't coming in. They were heading out. Something had already been inside. I moved through the house like I was underwater. Every sound stretched. Every corner felt occupied. I reached my bedroom. Everything was untouched, except the bed. There was a small hole at the foot of the frame. Freshly dug. The carpet peeled back. The floor splintered. Beneath it, I could see earth, and something blinking. Like a small, glowing eye. It blinked once. Then shut. Gone. I called the gas company. Told them I smelled a leak. I didn't wait for them to confirm. I drove to the next town, bought a jerry can of gasoline, came back at midnight. I poured it through the house, room by room. I stood at the base of the stairs, listening. 2:11 a.m. Then, tap, tap, tap. This time, it came from every wall at once, like the house itself was pulsing. Alive. I lit the match, dropped it into the stairwell. The fire caught fast. Within seconds, the whole structure roared like something wounded. The windows blew out. The foundation cracked wide. As I backed away, I saw shapes through the flames. Long, pale, watching me, but not leaving. They weren't done. I live in a small apartment now, second floor. No basement, no crawl space. I pour salt around the doors every night. I don't own a shovel. I sleep with a flashlight clutched in both hands. Still, every night at 2:12, I wake up. Not from a sound, from the silence. And sometimes, when I check the floorboards under my bed, they feel just a little bit loose.